Have you ever noticed how some people remain completely unshaken while chaos erupts around them? While others explode at the smallest inconvenience, these individuals move through life as if they possess an invisible shield, not of indifference, but of profound psychological mastery. Picture this. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your colleague takes credit for your work. A family member makes that comment they know triggers you. Most people react instantly, heart racing, jaw clenching, words they'll regret already forming. But there's another type of person. They observe, they process, they choose their response. And somehow, that choice infuriates others even more than any angry outburst ever could. What if I told you this isn't about suppressing emotion or pretending nothing bothers you? What if this ability to remain undisturbed is actually a form of psychological sovereignty that most people never develop because they've been conditioned to react, to defend, to prove themselves worthy of respect through emotional displays? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This single insight reveals why most people remain trapped in cycles of anger and reactivity. They're projecting their internal conflicts onto external triggers, giving away their power with every reactive outburst. The person who never gets angry isn't emotionless. They've simply done the psychological work to understand that anger is information, not instruction. They've learned to observe their triggers without being controlled by them. They've developed what Jung called consciousness, the ability to witness their psychological processes rather than being unconsciously driven by them. This video is not about becoming cold or detached from your emotions. It's about developing such profound self-awareness that other people's behavior can no longer hijack your nervous system, drain your energy, or control your emotional state. It's about reclaiming that. From the moment you could understand language, you were trained to react. You have been taught that showing anger demonstrates strength, that immediate emotional response proves you care, that letting things slide makes you weak or passive. You've been conditioned to believe that your anger validates your worth, that if you don't react strongly to disrespect, you're somehow accepting it. This is one of society's most destructive lies. The educational system rewarded quick reactions. The media glorified explosive confrontations. Your family dynamics may have taught you that the loudest person wins. Popular culture sold you the myth that standing up for yourself means matching someone's energy, escalating the conflict, proving through emotional intensity that you won't be pushed around. But here's what they never told you. This excessive reactivity is not strength. It is a prison. Every time you react with anger, you're demonstrating that external circumstances control your internal state. You're proving that other people's behavior, words, or attitudes have more power over you than you have over yourself. You've become predictable. And predictability is the foundation of manipulation. Think about it. The person who knows exactly what triggers you holds invisible strings. They can pull you into anger whenever they choose. They control when you lose composure, when you waste energy, when you damage relationships or your reputation. Your reactivity isn't protecting you. It's enslaving you to everyone who understands your patterns. Carl Jung developed the concept of the persona, the social mask we wear, the version of ourselves we present to maintain acceptance and navigate social expectations. For many people, part of this persona includes being someone you don't mess with, someone whose anger serves as a boundary, a deterrent, proof of their self-respect. But the persona is not your true self. It's a defensive construction built from social conditioning and childhood wounds. When you believe you must react with anger to maintain this persona, you're not being authentic. You're being controlled by an unconscious pattern that runs you like software runs a computer. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Being reactive is a subtle form of self-abandonment. When you react with anger, you abandon your higher consciousness in favor of your primitive brain's fight-or-flight response. You abandon your power to choose in favor of automatic patterns. You abandon your goals, your peace, your energy, all to prove a point to someone whose opinion of you ultimately changes nothing about your actual value. Why do people get so easily angered? Because they haven't done the internal work to separate their identity from external validation. Their sense of self is so fragile that perceived disrespect feels like an existential threat. Their ego requires constant defense because it's built on unstable foundations. What others think, how others treat them, whether others acknowledge their worth. This creates an exhausting life experience. You become a slave to circumstance. A good day equals someone who treats you well. A bad day equals someone disrespecting you. Your emotional state is constantly held hostage by external variables you cannot control. And society reinforces this prison by calling your reactivity passion, your anger authenticity, your inability to regulate emotions keeping it real. But these aren't virtues, they're symptoms of an underdeveloped psychological immune system. The truly dangerous part? This conditioning serves a purpose. Reactive people are easy to control. Angry people are predictable. When those in power, whether in relationships, workplaces, or society, can reliably trigger your emotional reactions, they can manipulate your decisions, drain your resources, and keep you focused on petty conflicts instead of meaningful goals. You've been taught to view anger as protective, but it's actually the opposite. It's an open wound that anyone can touch to make you bleed. It's a button anyone can press to make you perform. It's a weakness masquerading as strength. But before answering that, we need to understand one essential thing: the psychological mechanism that makes anger so seductive and yet so destructive to your autonomy and power. Carl Jung spoke extensively about psychic energy, the limited resource of attention, emotional capacity, and mental focus you possess each day. Unlike physical energy that replenishes with rest, psychic energy is finite and precious. How you invest it determines the quality of your consciousness and your life. Every moment of anger is a hemorrhage of psychic energy. When someone triggers you and you react with anger, here's what happens psychologically. Your primitive brain activates the amygdala, flooding your system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought, long-term planning, and emotional regulation, goes offline. You literally become less intelligent at that moment. You're now operating from the same brain structures that helped your ancestors fight off predators, but you're using this ancient system to deal with Karen's passive-aggressive email. This response consumes massive amounts of psychic energy. The emotional intensity, the rumination that follows, the conversations you replay in your mind, the revenge scenarios you construct. All of this drains the limited cognitive resources you could have invested in your goals, relationships, or personal growth. But here's where it gets deeper. Jung identified a crucial psychological principle at play in chronic anger: projection. Projection is the unconscious mechanism by which you attribute your own unacknowledged feelings, thoughts, or qualities to others. When you experience intense anger at someone's behavior, you're often reacting to something within yourself that you haven't integrated or accepted. The person who gets furious at others' perceived incompetence, they're often running from their own fear of inadequacy. The person enraged by others' selfishness, usually denying their own unmet needs and desires. The person who cannot tolerate disrespect typically hasn't developed genuine self-respect and relies on external validation to feel worthy. Jung said that a healthy psyche is one that knows how to integrate the shadow, those parts of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or suppressed. When you haven't done this work, every trigger becomes a mirror showing you what you refuse to see about yourself. And because you don't recognize it as internal, you fight external battles that can never be won because the real conflict is inside you. This is why some people can encounter the same situation you find infuriating and remain completely unaffected. They're not experiencing it through the lens of their unintegrated shadow. They're not projecting their inner conflicts onto external circumstances. They're seeing reality more clearly because they're not looking through the distorted filter of unresolved psychological material. Think about how much energy you've spent being angry at things that, ultimately, changed nothing about your life trajectory. The driver who cut you off, gone in seconds, but you carried the anger for hours. The coworker's comment, irrelevant to your actual worth, but you've rehearsed your comeback 100 times in your mind. The family member's judgment says more about their limitations than your choices, yet you've exhausted yourself trying to prove them wrong. This energy depletion has real consequences. When your psychic energy is constantly drained by reactive anger, you have nothing left for what matters. You can't pursue meaningful goals because you're exhausted from petty conflicts. You can't build deep relationships because you're always on the defensive. You can't develop your potential because your attention is fragmented across 1,000 resentments. Moreover, this depleted state makes you more vulnerable to manipulation. When your emotional resources are low, you have less capacity for conscious choice. You react faster, think less clearly, and fall into patterns more easily. The very people who trigger you most are often exploiting this vulnerability, consciously or unconsciously, to control you. The psychological principle governing this is simple. Whatever has the power to anger you controls you. Not partially, completely. Because anger disconnects you from your higher faculties and activates your most primitive responses. It's the perfect tool for those who wish to manipulate, distract, or neutralize you. Jung understood this deeply. He recognized that consciousness, the ability to observe your psychological processes without being enslaved by them, is the foundation of true freedom. When you remain conscious during moments designed to trigger unconscious reactions, you reclaim sovereignty over your inner world. And that bothers people because now we are entering dangerous territory. The territory where you're no longer playing the game by the rules they understand, where your unshakable presence forces them to confront something deeply uncomfortable about themselves. Let me reveal something that might disturb you. Many people in your life have learned exactly how to trigger your anger because your reaction serves a purpose for them. The colleague who accidentally takes credit for your work, then acts shocked when you get angry, they've now made you the problem instead of addressing their theft. Your anger allows them to shift the narrative from "they stole" to "you overreacted." The family member who pushes your buttons about your life choices, then acts hurt when you explode, they've just confirmed their narrative that you're too sensitive, too defensive, proving they were right to be concerned about you. Your anger validates their judgment. The partner who escalates minor disagreements until you lose your temper, then uses your anger as evidence you're the real problem in the relationship, they've successfully avoided accountability by making your reaction the issue rather than their behavior. This is manipulation through emotional exploitation, and it operates through a simple psychological mechanism, redirecting attention from their action to your reaction. When you react with anger, you give manipulative people exactly what they need: evidence that you're unstable, proof that you're difficult, justification for their treatment of you, and most importantly, a distraction from their own behavior. Your anger becomes the story. Their actions get forgotten. But there's a deeper layer. Many people unconsciously provoke anger in others because they're addicted to the drama, the intensity, the distraction from their own inner emptiness. Triggering your reaction gives them a sense of power in a life where they feel powerless. Your explosion confirms they can still affect someone, still matter, still control something in their environment. That person who always brings up topics they know upset you, that's not accidental. That person who constantly tests your boundaries until you snap, that's not a coincidence. That person who seems to know exactly what to say to make you lose composure, that's not bad timing. These are patterns of psychological manipulation, often unconscious, where your anger serves as their emotional supply, their drama fix, their confirmation that they have influence. Here's what happens when you stop providing this supply: they escalate. When someone pushes your buttons and you don't react, they often push harder. They'll try different triggers, escalate their provocations, even directly accuse you of being cold or uncaring. Why? Because your composed presence threatens their entire system. Your refusal to play the game removes their power. Your consciousness exposes their unconsciousness. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you remain unshaken by attempts to trigger you, you hold up a mirror to others' shadow, the manipulative patterns they're running unconsciously. And most people will do anything to avoid seeing their own darkness. Your emotional sovereignty is a threat because it forces others to confront their own lack of self-control. When you don't react to provocations that would send most people into a rage, you reveal what's possible, a level of psychological development they haven't achieved. This creates cognitive dissonance in them. Rather than aspire to your level, many will try to drag you back down to theirs. They'll call you cold. They'll say you don't care. They'll claim you're being passive-aggressive by not reacting. They'll interpret your conscious non-reactivity as judgment of them, which, in a way, it is. Not conscious judgment, but your presence naturally highlights their lack of presence. Your consciousness illuminates their unconsciousness, and that's deeply threatening to the ego. This is why developing immunity to anger isn't just about personal peace. It's about disrupting the manipulative patterns that keep relationships dysfunctional, workplaces toxic, and families trapped in destructive cycles. When you can observe someone's attempt to trigger you without being triggered, you see the mechanism clearly. You see their pain, their need for control, their fear, their emptiness. And from this place of clarity, you can choose: engage consciously or disengage entirely, but never react unconsciously. This power, this ability to remain sovereign in your emotional state regardless of external provocations, is what we need to understand next. The psychological power that makes you immune to anger is not emotional suppression. It's not pretending things don't affect you. It's not building walls around your heart. It's something far more powerful and transformative: conscious emotional sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty is the developed capacity to experience your emotions fully while maintaining the ability to choose your response. It's the space between stimulus and reaction that Viktor Frankl described, expanded through psychological work into a cathedral of consciousness where you observe, process, and decide rather than automatically react. This power allows you to see manipulation attempts as information rather than attacks. When someone tries to trigger you, instead of reacting, you observe. Why are they doing this? What need of theirs is this serving? What does this reveal about their psychological state? You're no longer in the experience. You're witnessing the experience, which gives you complete freedom to choose how, when, or whether to respond. People react dramatically when you demonstrate this power. Some become confused. Their usual tactics don't work, and they don't understand why. Some become frustrated. They escalate, trying harder to get the reaction they're used to getting. Some become curious. They sense something different about you, something they want to understand. And some become hostile. Your composed presence threatens their identity as it exists, forcing them to confront their own reactivity. True emotional mastery is not the absence of feeling. It is mastery over your response to feeling. It's the difference between being angry and consciously choosing how to address what angered you. It's the recognition that anger itself isn't the enemy. Unconscious slavery to anger is. This connects directly to Jung's concept of individuation, the psychological process of becoming a whole, integrated individual rather than a collection of unconscious reactions and social conditioning. Individuation requires you to withdraw your projections, integrate your shadow, and develop consciousness about your patterns. When you do this work, anger transforms from an automatic reaction into useful information about boundaries, values, or unmet needs. But let's be honest about the challenges. Developing emotional sovereignty will distance you from people who are addicted to drama. It will make relationships end that were based on unhealthy patterns. It will reveal who in your life respected you versus who enjoyed triggering you. Family members who could always push your buttons will struggle to understand this new version of you. Friends who bonded with you over shared resentments and anger will feel abandoned when you stop feeding those patterns. Sometimes emotional sovereignty is not weakness. It is the strongest stance you can take, choosing to remain conscious and sovereign regardless of what others do. It's refusing to let someone else's unconsciousness drag you into yours. It's maintaining your center while chaos swirls around you. This doesn't mean you never address problems or set boundaries. In fact, you become far more effective at both. When you address issues from a place of consciousness rather than reactive anger, your communication is clear, your boundaries are firm, and your actions are strategic rather than emotional. People actually hear you better because they're not defending against your attack. They're receiving your conscious communication. The person who cannot be angered is not weak. They're psychologically sophisticated. They've done the inner work to understand their triggers. They've integrated enough of their shadow that they're not constantly projecting onto others. They've developed the ability to pause, observe, and choose rather than react automatically. This is true power in human interaction. Not the power to make others angry. That's easy. Not the power to win arguments through force. That's primitive. The power to remain completely sovereign in your emotional state regardless of external circumstances. That's mastery. Jung believed individuation was the highest psychological achievement, becoming who you truly are rather than what conditioning made you. And you cannot individuate while remaining a slave to reactive anger, because that anger keeps you trapped in unconscious patterns, repeating the same cycles, giving your power away to anyone who knows which buttons to push. It will distance you from people who need you to be reactive, who require your anger to fuel their drama or validate their worldview. But it will connect you to people who value consciousness, who respect emotional maturity, who can engage with you at a deeper level than petty triggering and reactive conflict. It's no use understanding all of this intellectually if in practice you continue reacting with anger to every provocation, giving your power away to circumstances and people who ultimately don't determine your worth or destiny. Conscious emotional sovereignty requires deliberate practice. It's not something you understand once and master forever. It's a continuous practice of choosing consciousness over conditioning. Here's how to implement this in your daily life. First, develop the pause. Between any trigger and your response, create space. Even 3 seconds of conscious breathing activates your prefrontal cortex and interrupts the automatic anger response. This pause is where your power lives. In that space, You're not suppressing anger. You're choosing whether this situation deserves your emotional energy and how best to address it. Second, practice the observer perspective. When you feel anger rising, mentally step back and observe it. I'm experiencing anger. My body is tense. My thoughts are accelerating. This simple shift from I am angry to I'm experiencing anger creates psychological distance that restores choice. You're no longer identified with the emotion, you're witnessing it. Third, investigate your triggers. Keep a journal of what makes you angry. Look for patterns. What underlying need or value is threatened when you get angry? What childhood wound is being touched? What part of yourself are you protecting? This is shadow work, bringing unconscious material into consciousness where it loses its power over you. Fourth, recognize projection. When anger at someone feels disproportionate to their action, ask yourself, what aspect of myself am I seeing in them that I haven't accepted? Often the intensity of our anger reveals what we're denying about ourselves. The person who enrages you is often showing you your own shadow. Fifth, reframe disrespect. When someone disrespects you, understand they're revealing their character, not determining your worth. Their behavior is information about them, their wounds, their consciousness level, their psychological development. It says nothing about your actual value. This reframe removes the sting that triggers anger. Sixth, establish conscious boundaries. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to explain your standards. You don't need to react with anger to enforce them. State them clearly, calmly, and remove yourself from situations or relationships where they're violated. This is far more powerful than angry outbursts that drain you and change nothing. Seventh, redirect the energy. Anger is energy. Instead of exploding outward or suppressing inward, channel it into purposeful action. Use it to fuel your goals, strengthen your boundaries, or catalyze necessary changes. This is what Jung meant by integrating the shadow, not eliminating the energy, but consciously directing it. You don't need to announce this transformation. You don't need to explain to people why you're no longer reactive. In fact, explaining often reinvites drama. Simply live it. Let your unshakable presence speak for itself. Here's your thermometer for evolution. Notice how people react to your new emotional sovereignty. Those who respect you will respect you more. Those who enjoyed controlling you through anger will become frustrated and may distance themselves. Those who are psychologically mature will recognize and appreciate your growth. And those who are unconscious will escalate their attempts to trigger you before eventually giving up or leaving. This process will trigger guilt. You'll feel like you should defend yourself, should prove you're not a pushover, should react to demonstrate you care. This guilt is your conditioning speaking. When you say no to reactive anger, you are saying yes to consciousness, sovereignty, and genuine power. The discomfort you feel is the death of old patterns, necessary for the birth of your individual self. The journey from reactive anger to emotional sovereignty is not comfortable. It's death and rebirth. The person you were, predictable, controllable through emotional triggers, enslaved to circumstance, must die for the sovereign individual to emerge. This is Jung's individuation process in action. You're not becoming emotionless, you're becoming conscious. You're not detaching from life, you're engaging more authentically, because your responses come from choice rather than conditioning. You're not building walls, you're developing boundaries based on values rather than defenses based on wounds. The progression looks like this. First, you notice your anger patterns, but still react. This awareness without control is frustrating but essential. You can't change what you don't see. Then, you catch yourself mid-reaction, able to course correct, but not prevent the initial surge. Progress. Then comes the pause. You feel the anger rising but can delay your response. giving consciousness time to activate. Eventually, you experience triggers as information rather than attacks, observing them with curiosity rather than defensiveness. This transformation costs you. You'll lose relationships that were based on drama and reactivity. You'll lose the identity of being the passionate one or the one who doesn't take any shit. You'll lose the validation that came from others seeing you fight back, proving your worth through emotional displays. But what you gain is immeasurable. You gain peace, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of consciousness. You gain energy, no longer hemorrhaging it through reactive anger and rumination. You gain respect from yourself and from those capable of recognizing emotional maturity. You gain freedom from the prison of predictable reactions, from the control others had through your buttons, from the exhausting cycle of anger and regret. You gain yourself, because when you are no longer a slave to reactive anger, you become the author of your emotional experience. You choose what affects you, how deeply, and for how long. You decide which battles deserve your energy and which are distractions from your purpose. You determine your worth internally rather than defending it externally. This is self-love in its truest form, choosing consciousness over conditioning, sovereignty over reactivity, long-term peace over short-term validation. It's recognizing that your emotional state is sacred territory, and you no longer allow anyone or anything to trespass unconsciously. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You cannot become who you truly are while trapped in reactive patterns inherited from childhood, society, or past wounds. Emotional sovereignty is how you reclaim yourself from the conditioning that's been running you. Yes, it will be lonely sometimes. The conscious person always experiences some loneliness in an unconscious world. But it's the loneliness of freedom, not the loneliness of isolation. You'll find others who live at this level, and those connections will be deeper, more authentic, more nourishing than anything you experienced while enslaved to reactivity. This is not about perfection. You'll still feel anger, but you'll feel it consciously, use it wisely, and release it intentionally. You'll still have triggers, but they'll inform you rather than control you. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to reclaim your emotional sovereignty and stop giving your power away through reactive anger in the name of your psychological freedom? If this video provides value, subscribe for more psychology that makes you dangerous. Dangerous to the systems that profit from your unconsciousness, the patterns that keep you trapped, and the conditioning that makes you controllable.